Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to do some practice related to banks. Let's get started. Okay, so the first question here gives us that Jamie deposits $1,000 of her cash into her checking account. Reserve requirement's 20%. The bank doesn't hold any excess reserves. Now, when it gives us this immediate effect of her deposit, it's saying before loans, right? Before any lending. And that's really what that word is supposed to tip us off, is to think, oh, this is before the bank has lent anything out. And the effect on the money supply is no change because the cash was already in M1. And you could actually say it was also in MB. So it doesn't really matter if we're counting it money supply as MB or M1. Cash is counted, and so by depositing it into her checking account, then the money still counts as money. It's checking account money and it's bank reserve money, so it would still count. Maximum amount of money the bank could initially lend out, well, that's the 80%, and so we would say they could lend out 800 because reserve ratio is 20%. So we do have to explain. What's the maximum amount of money the bank system can create? Well, we know the money multiplier is 1 over the required reserve ratio. And so that's 1 over 0.2, which is 5. If they can loan out 800, multiply that by 5, that gives us $4,000. So the first loan that they make times that money multiplier is going to give us our maximum possible change. Give one reason why the money supply may not go up by that much. Well, people might hold cash and not redeposit. And what we're saying when we say that is that the next person in line will basically not have as much money because they won't be able to borrow as much from the bank because that person, the first person, chose not to redeposit all their money. The other reason is that banks might hold excess reserves. And so the bank could choose to not lend out extra money, and that's really what this one is saying, right? The bank could just choose not to make the loans. Number 2, Lucas opens a checking account. Good job, Lucas. $100 in cash at Clayton Bank. Required reserve is 5%. Banking system has limited reserves. What's the amount by which their liabilities have changed? Well, 100, because deposits are liabilities for banks. Liabilities for banks. And so they owe him his $100, so we would say that they've gone up by 100. Calculate the change in required reserves for the bank. Well, 5% of 100 equals $5. Letter C, dollar value, the maximum amount of new loans that they can initially make from the deposit. So this one's a little bit tricky just in the verbiage, right? But it's saying not the maximum possible change in the whole system, but initially what they can make. That's the key word here. And so they can lend out 95% of the 100, which is equal to $95. Then, as a result of the deposit, calculate the maximum amount by which the money supply could change. This one's we're going to use the money multiplier. And so it would be the $95. That's the first loan that they could make. And the money multiplier here is 1 over the reserve ratio. That's 1 over 0.05, which is money multiplier of 20. So times 20. And this one will be 950 times 2 is $1,900. Last but not least, how will the change in the money supply affect aggregate demand and unemployment in the short run? Explain. Well, an increased supply of money, right? Therefore, interest rates go down. Therefore, we can say consumption and investment go up. We probably don't need that one. Aggregate demand goes up, and therefore unemployment will go down. And we can kind of show a little picture if we wanted to, right? We could say price levels and output and SRAS and AD. And when AD goes up, we have higher prices and more output, and that's what's going to cause us to go with lower unemployment. So we'd have more output and lower unemployment. Let's take a look at these multiple choice questions. Okay. Number 1, a bank has 200 million in demand deposits and 150 million in reserves. The reserve ratio is 20%. What's the maximum amount they can lend? So they have to keep 20% of 200. 20% of that would be 10% is 20. So they have to keep 40 million. and they have 150, so they could make 110. 150 minus 40. Number two, a commercial bank's ability to create money depends on which of the following. A fractional reserve banking system, they need to be able to hold some deposits and then lend out the rest. So fractional reserve. Bank has 800 million in demand deposits, 100 million in reserves. If the reserve requirement's 10, their excess reserves are what? So they have 80 million in required reserves, so they need 100 minus 80 is 20. B. Number four, assume the Atlantic Bank has demand deposits of 100, no excess reserves, reserve requirements 10%. Customer withdraws 5. To meet the new reserve requirement, the bank must do what? So for this one, if we had an original amount of required reserves of 10K, and that's how much they had only the 10,000 in required reserves, and somebody withdraws 5,000, then their total reserves is now 5K. And the change here would be down to 95K, right? Because this person withdrew it. 95K, 10% is 9,500 in required reserves. So they need, right? They need that much, 9,500, and they have that much. So they need how much more? They need 4,500 more. Number five, assume that the reserve requirement is 20%. If a bank initially has no excess reserves and $10,000 in cash deposited in the bank, the maximum amount by which the bank may increase its loans is the 80%. And so 80% of that is $8,000. Then this is really just saying, maybe we should say cross out the word maximum there. It's really just saying how much that bank could actually lend out is 80% of the 10. Number six, assume that Linda deposits in her checking account $1,000 cash, keeping an emergency required reserve rate of 20%. What's the maximum change in the money supply? This is the key part here. 1 over 0.2 is 5. We know that they could lend 800. So 800 times 5 equals $4,000. Number seven, assume the public holds part of its money in cash and the rest in checking. The banking system has limited reserves. If the central bank lowers the reserve requirement from 16 to 8, the money supply is going to double. And the notion of that is because the banks basically are going to lend out all that money, right? If they're no longer required to have it. And when they lower that reserve requirement, the banks lend out more. They literally double how much money is out in the system. So we would say that. Now, the tricky part here is going to be, let's see if it exactly doubles or increases by less than double. Now, here's the tricky part. It tells you in this question, the public holds part of its money in cash. This is the important part. That's why it's going to increase by less than double. This is why. Is because people will hold on to the money in cash. And the idea here is that when the bank lends out all that extra money, we would expect the money supply to double only if the money multiplier, right? If the money multiplier were that new 1 over the reserve ratio. But the issue here is that people are basically interrupting that process, that the next deposit is not going to be as large. And so we won't get as large of an increase in the money supply as what we might expect. If it said that the public holds none, then the answer would be exactly double. Number 8, the amount of money that the public wants to hold is 10, with a monetary base of 2 and a money multiplier of 4. Which of the following will most likely occur? Now, this is a really, really tough question, but it's saying the demand for money is 10, right? The quantity demanded. And the quantity supplied is 4 times 2 is 8. And so we have a situation where there's a shortage of money. And that sounds a little weird, but the shortage will cause the price of something to go up, right? If there's more demand for something than there is being supplied in the current moment, then we expect the price of it to rise. And so the price of money will go up. Now, what do we call the price of money? We call that the interest rate. And so we would say the nominal interest rate will increase, right? The price of money is just interest, so we expect the price of money to rise. Number 9, which of the following is the determinant of the amount of money the commercial banking system can create? That's going to be the reserve requirement, right? That's how much money they could lend. So the money multiplier is what this one is saying. Money multiplier is 1 over the required reserve ratio. Suppose the required reserve ratio is 20%, single bank with no excess reserves receives a $100 deposit. The bank now has 80% excess, so they have $80 of excess reserves. One quick note is that as I was kind of thinking as I was working through these, that we are probably not really covered not really in 8.2 here, more of a preview of 8.3 as well. So this concept down here, it's fine if this was like, whoa, 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 what was going on with that? And really, it's just kind of connecting what we're doing here with the very next lesson. So hopefully this helped you with 8.2 banks. I'll see you next time.